Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Judith Bevell, and I am the town clerk for the town of Greenburgh. Welcome to this point along our journey. This is a journey that started several weeks ago with the gentleman who I'm going to introduce to you as our moderator. Actually, it started a few years ago with our police chief. A few years back, when Chief McNerney first became chief of police, he brought to the town's attention the need to focus on the illegal operations of massage parlors along Central Avenue. That is not to say that every massage parlor is illegal, but our chief had his antennas up and he knew what was going on. So he brought this to the town board's attention, and then the town board asked the town attorney to look into it, and we have some residents who were very interested, hence legislation that's been proposed by an Edgemont resident, Mr. Bernstein. And following all of the discussion that the town has been engaged in, prompted by our police chief and others, and the attention that's been given to this issue at the national, state, and local levels, our moderator, Marty Payson, said, I know someone who can really bring this matter into focus for our town. As a matter of fact, I know several someones. And he brought to us our guest speaker, Ken Pickard, who Marty will introduce. He was an award-winning journalist, as well as Lauren Peso, who is the director of the Human Trafficking Program of My Sister's Place. So I believe in giving credit where credit is due. I just want to applaud and thank Marty, who is a resident of our town, for bringing, for heightening the importance of this issue and informing our residents about what is going on in our own backyards. In getting me involved as a resident as well as your town clerk, I am very, very concerned about the quality of life in our town, as well as the possibility of exploitation of women, men, and minors. Hence my involvement. Without further ado, I wish to introduce to you our moderator, Marty Payson, who is a practicing lawyer, has been a practicing lawyer for over 46 years, resident of Edgemont for 35 years. And Marty comes to us with a very grassroots background. He grew up in Brooklyn. Talking about a tree that grew in Brooklyn. Okay. And went on to major and specialize in the legal field. And Marty helped CEOs to understand how to treat people with respect so that they might avoid being charged with human rights violation. So this is a man who comes to us with many years of experience and expertise and passion for sharing with others how to treat people right. Marty Payson.
Thank you. You're much too generous in your introduction. As you heard, I'm a lawyer. Try not to hold it against me. More importantly, for our purposes, what Judith said, and that was for the last 46 years, I've engaged in the practice of a type of human rights law, the law of the workplace, the law of discrimination, the law in which certain people, particularly women, were the victims of sex harassment, sex discrimination, sexual exploitation, and a whole variety of other type issues. So that's the orientation you're going to be hearing tonight. Tonight's discussion is being recorded and actually may be shown on a variety of local TV channels. I mention this because I would like our viewers, as well as those present in the room tonight, to understand that we will be dealing with adult subject matter. Our discussion may very well include specific references to sexual activity, prostitution, sexual slavery, physical and mental abuse, human trafficking, the sex trade, massage parlors, just to mention a few, and may in fact get rather explicit. If you are uncomfortable with this, or if someone who is viewing this with you might be uncomfortable, now is the time to change channels. And for those of you who are in the room and may be uncomfortable, you can feel free to get up and leave now or any other time. Let me tell you what prompted this particular session tonight. The town of Greenburgh has formed a Human Rights Advisory Committee. One of its tasks is to suggest educational forum on a variety of what are specific human rights issues in Greenburgh, and to also act as a liaison for the county, Westchester County Human Rights Commission. At one of the first meetings, I suggested we consider doing a program on human trafficking. It is a subject I first started to appreciate a few years ago by reading a series of articles written by one of our guest speakers, Ken Picard. Ken had done extensive research on the subject, had written a series of articles involving this subject that was printed over, he'll tell us, several months or several years on a variety of subjects. And so my antenna were up, and when the term human trafficking started to be mentioned, I always listened kind of closely. And then last fall, if you recall, we started receiving reports about what was happening in the Middle East, about the terrible human rights violations being engaged in by the ISIS group, some of which involve kidnapping, raping, and sexual bondage of young girls and women. Okay, part of my concern as awakened by Ken. Very soon thereafter, we started receiving reports about what was happening in Nigeria and the Boko Haram group in Africa, which was engaging in the same sort of conduct. You will recall they kidnapped 300 young students, women, took them off into the bush, I guess, and in fact engaged in rape and ultimately the sex trafficking of these people. Again, a matter of some concern for me. I sincerely hope that as we go through tonight's discussion, these stories will resonate with you as they resonated with me. When I first say the word resonate, what I'm trying to do is get across an idea that these are not 300 nameless and faceless individuals. Each one of them has a name, each one of them has a face, each one of them has an identity, each one of them has a soul. They're human beings. But we tend to think of 300 people in Africa, they're over there somewhere, and they're kind of meaningless. But they're not meaningless at all. I want you to put yourself into this position. Supposing what happened to those 300 young girls happened to your mother, your wife, your sister, your daughter, your granddaughter, your niece or nephew. Supposing that happened to them, how would you feel? I mean, really, how would you feel about that? unless you personalize this, unless you identify with this, and unless you put a face and a name to this, the whole discussion really becomes somewhat meaningless. That's what I mean when I say resonate. I focus on the victims, not the perpetrators. There's a big difference. I don't care about the men who did this to them. I'm concerned what happened to all these women. And it's, by the way, been some time since anyone has even spoken about them. And in thinking about it, it really created a sense of frustration in me about all these terrible events that were happening thousands of miles away with victims I didn't know. And in actuality, I thought there was very little, if anything, I could do about it. I'm here, there, way over there. The United Nations recently held a major conference to bring everyone's attention to the status and rights of women all around the world. As you might expect, human trafficking was on a worldwide agenda and was discussed at some length. And in fact, human trafficking in the United States was discussed at the United Nations. The problem is actually so significant in our country that today, literally today, pending in Congress, is a bill to strengthen the American anti-trafficking laws. Unfortunately, as so many things in Washington, the bill is being held up for political reasons. How could anybody oppose a bill that tries to crack down on trafficking? It's like opposing a bill that supports sunshine. I mean, how do you oppose it? But the politics of it all frequently get involved. As a matter of fact, it's expected to be passed. The president undoubtedly will sign it, but we don't know when. Here in New York State, the legislature has been dealing with the same problem, human trafficking. And again, the same thing is happening. It's being held up for political reasons, the frustration of it all. Our local assemblywoman, Amy Poland, when I say local, she's in the neighboring assembly district in Scarsdale, was the initiator of a bill to strengthen the New York State law on trafficking, and she was successful in breaking it out of the logjam and getting it passed 2 weeks ago. So we're starting to see something. It has not been signed yet by the governor. About 2 years ago, when we were discussing this before, here in Westchester County, they launched the Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force. Did I get the name?
Yeah, but 5 years ago.
Oh, excuse me, 5 years ago. Thank you. In recognition of the very serious human rights problem that exists right here in the county. I'm not talking about the Middle East. I'm not talking about Africa. I'm not talking about generally in our country. I'm not talking about New York State. I'm talking about right here in the county. And this task force was put together. I really hope you're all starting to connect the dots and starting to see the picture emerge about how significant the problem this is. And while the massage parlor issue on Central Avenue may be a burning issue for some people in our community, and I don't mean to make light of it, I would ask you all to make a much broader view of the problem of human trafficking than just massage parlors. Is an enormous human rights issue impacting hundreds, if not thousands of women, principally, who are the victims, not just in Greenburgh, and not just in Westchester County, but all across this country. When I say trafficking, let me offer a definition to you. I'm referring to all sorts of exploitive labor situations. Workers who are exploited in all sorts of different fashions by their employer, and I'll use that in quotes. This would include situations involving domestic servitude, household help who are being kept as slaves. I think Ken will talk to us about Mexican farm workers, people who are enslaved working in Chinese restaurants, and we can go on and on giving you lots of examples. So this is not just about massage parlors. One of tonight's speakers, Lauren Pesso, I hope, Lauren, you will give us all of the different examples you're familiar with of all the trafficking here in Westchester County and in Greenburgh and, in the area, so that our friends can appreciate what a problem this is. Also, when we use the term massage parlor, we are not speaking of the absolutely legitimate spas that exist up and down Central Avenue and through the entire region of Greenburgh. I can't get all the names, but Massage Envy and the Tranquility Spa, you know the ones I'm talking about. There are lots of these legitimate places, and we are not speaking about that tonight. So what is it that we are speaking about? When we make reference to massage parlors, they go by many different names and euphemisms. Brothels, bordellos, dens of iniquity, houses of ill repute, whorehouses. Take your pick. What we're all referring to is an establishment that uses women to sell sex. The very short definition for you. And the sale of sex, as hopefully our chief will tell us, is called prostitution. Yes. These women, frequently teenage girls or even younger, but not always victims of trafficking. Some get into this for other reasons. But they may have been smuggled into this country, taken off the streets, lured on the internet, and forced through physical and psychological coercion to sell their bodies many times a day. These are the victims that I'm concerned about, and I hope you are as well. I make this very specific point because I'm often discouraged to read in some of the local press and listen to some of the local groups focus on the process of trying to get local laws passed to deal with these massage parlors. The process. And very rarely do they express concern for the plight of the victims who are the women forced into this activity. Again, Lauren, I want you to talk about these victims, if you can. I read or hear comments to the effect, and the chief will love this one, why haven't we closed those brothels down? What are we waiting for? Right? How often do we hear that? In recent conversations with neighbors and friends, I heard their emotions and, in some cases, their petty politics get way out ahead of their clear thinking on this issue. Let me tell you a story. I recently was at a local social gathering with about 10 or 12 people in our area. I was speaking to someone about the human trafficking and the political issues that are holding up all this legislation in Washington and Albany. Someone must have overheard what I was saying because they sort of inserted themselves into the conversation and said the following. I'm going to try to quote these as best I can for you. You must be talking about the massage parlors on Central Avenue, and we all know what goes on there, was his comment. I thought for a minute, and then I said, oh, really? How do you know what goes on there? Have you ever been in one? He and the others in our group either reluctantly or proudly said they never had. So let me test it out right now. By a showing of hands, please. How many of you have ever been in a massage parlor? As I'm using the definition of massage parlor, a place where women sell sex.
Maybe.
I didn't see a single hand go up.
We might. Maybe.
Some may have been there and don't even know they were selling sex.
That could very well be. Okay. What I'm really trying to say is, if you haven't been there, all you have is this vague impression of what's transpiring in these places. And so I went on, I said to them, well, if you haven't been there, because none of the people raised their hand, I said, do you know anybody who's been there? Secondhand hearsay evidence, Counselor, but okay. And of course, none of them even knew anyone who had been there. And so nobody had any real information about these supposed dens of iniquity. Then someone said, I'd like to speculate about what's going on there. And I said, before you start to speculate, let's try to deal with the facts. They responded, quote, "Come on, Marty. You can tell from the ads on the internet and elsewhere what goes on there. They show scantily clad women in sexually provocative positions. Doesn't that tell you what they're selling?" I said, wait a minute. Are you sure you're not talking about the Victoria's Secrets catalog? You know, scantily clad women in sexually provocative positions? And I have no reason to believe that Victoria's Secret is selling sex behind the curtains there. So watch the conclusions and the assumptions that you make. For those of you who have never seen the ads that these massage parlors put up, you can go right on the internet and see them. Or the site, by the way, is backpage.com. I see, Steve, I see you writing that down, backpage.com. Yeah. Or you can go to the ECC website, which was kind enough to republish those salacious ads that are being complained about. Then someone at the gathering actually said, Marty, did you ever watch the people who go into these places? I said, quite frankly, I had better things to do with my time. But in one place that I do pass regularly, I never saw anything going on. Right, Ken? The place is, sign says open, but you never see anything. And then I said to this person, what did you see? The woman who I was speaking to said she saw, and I again like to quote, scruffy-looking men walking up to the door, looking around both ways, and come out sometime later with smiles on their face. At first, I was in absolute disbelief. You actually wasted your time sitting around for half an hour or an hour waiting to see guys come out of a place with smiles on your face? What does that say about you? And then I said, I'm really not sure what you're talking about in terms of the place you're identifying. Let's see. Scruffily looking men going into a business establishment and coming out a half an hour later with a smile on the face. Are you sure you're not talking about Home Depot? I mean, construction workers going there, found the elbow or joint they're looking for, come out later and smile? Do you really think seeing someone coming out of a place of business with a smile on the face will justify a finding of prostitution? Notice all the assumptions that are made so quickly. These arguments apparently annoyed some of the people there, as I see they're annoying some of you, which is okay. And so someone said to me rather indignantly, and I'll quote again, we all know the type of people who patronize prostitutes. We don't want them in our community. The Edgemont argument, we don't want them in our community. I responded that unlike you, the person I was speaking to, I must really lead a very sheltered life because I actually don't know anyone who visits prostitutes. But I said I'd look into it. When I got home that night, I went on Google. I put in the following words, New York State and prostitution. And one of the first items that popped up was a story about our former governor, Eliot Spitzer. You remember how he lost his position? And so now I understand what my neighbors are concerned about. Okay? They do not want to have coming into our community millionaire ex-politicians in pinstripe suits. You know, maybe they're right. Politics and prostitution really don't necessarily go well together. I really hope you're starting to get the point I'm trying to make about making emotional decisions and proposing laws and actions based on assumptions and speculations and fantasies. Finally, really realizing that he had no real facts to go on, said, why don't the cops, Chris, Why, and you'll tell us what you do. Why don't the cops just put an undercover guy in there wearing a wire and get the evidence? At first, I thought this guy had been watching too many CSI episodes. So I asked him, on what part of the anatomy would you put the microphone and wire? If the person's lying on a table naked. And don't give me a wise guy answer, all right? And then I asked, what would you expect this guy to do? Take a selfie of a woman performing a sex act on him? I mean, think about the gathering of evidence. Someone else said, Lauren, you may even want to talk about this one. How about interviewing the women involved? We think about it, how many of these women who are victims of the worst type of slavery and coercion will cooperate with the authorities, particularly if their immigration status is in question? Do you really think you're going to get them to speak freely about what takes place? It may be of interest for you to know that, and I hope our chief will mention this, that of the 6 massage parlors that were raided in Greenburgh a couple of weeks ago, and correct me right now if I'm wrong, okay, there was no evidence whatsoever of prostitution or human trafficking. You don't have to comment. Okay. As far as I know, there was no evidence of prostitution. There's an investigation going on. I don't want to put them on the spot. Okay. But the problem is everybody thinks that's going on there, but they were unable to come up with, I believe, evidence of that. They found other things involving violation of the licenses. They closed them down because of that unlicensed massage therapist. And I was amazed when I looked into this one, Chris. The crime of prostitution is a Class B misdemeanor, punishable by up to 3 months in jail. Okay. The crime of doing massage without a license is a Class E felony, punishable by up to 4 years in jail. So you're better off to get caught for prostitution than you are for engaging in massage. So the laws say. Our town now is struggling to pass new laws regarding the closure of massage parlors. I would urge them in the process to very carefully review the recent legislation passed in Albany to make sure it's coordinated and not in conflict with what is about to be enacted. For those of you who struggle, as I do, with the more important question of not the mechanics of passing local laws, but how to help these human sex trafficking victims, I say quite frankly, and I hope all of our panelists will comment, there are no easy answers and no quick fixes. One of our local newspapers reported just a few weeks ago that in Clarkstown, New York, there are 3 massage parlors in operation, even though that community supposedly has what is deemed to be a model effective law to deal with them. They have, the best law. They still have 3 that are in operation. You can pass all the laws you like, but even with your best evidence, Chief, if you cannot get the evidence, you cannot permanently close them down. And again, I hope the Chief will speak to that. I hope he'll also speak to the fact that starting a number of years ago, a major coordinated effort with the FBI, Homeland Security, the U.S. Attorney's Office, District Attorney, a whole bunch of other people, was put together and culminated in 14, was it? 2014?
It culminated in 2013.
2013, in a raid which shut down a number of these. But they popped right up again. So they don't call it the oldest profession for no reason. Let me conclude my opening remarks by saying that the law we should all be focusing on, I sincerely believe, is one which provides aid and assistance and social services to the victims of the exploitive labor situations in Greenburgh and throughout the country. And that includes giving money and support to agencies such as My Sister's Place and others which are reaching out to help these victims of sex trafficking. I hope that sets the table for you. Okay. At this point, I'd like to turn this over to Ken Picard. Ken actually will tell you that he went undercover and took an assignment to do some writing. His wife, Stacy, was not particularly happy about his taking this assignment. And you know how I know? He's my nephew. Ken, tell it like it is.
While Ken is coming down, I just want to acknowledge in our audience this evening is one of our town council members, Ken Jones. Ken?
Thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it. Thanks for the introduction, Marty. Never at a loss for words.
That's for sure.
It's kind of interesting because it was very fortuitous that I was going to be in the New York area. My wife and family and I live up in the Burlington, Vermont area, and we're actually, the primary reason we're here is to celebrate Passover with our family. And there's something kind of fitting, I think, about having a discussion about human trafficking during a week when many of us are talking about slavery and liberation from slavery, because I think that is exactly what this is all about. I also want to start at the beginning by saying that I am not an expert on human trafficking. I've been a journalist for about 16 years, and in that time I've had opportunities to discover what I had strong evidence to believe was human trafficking, and I'll just tell you a little bit about each of those. And I think that even though they're very different kinds of cases, I think they have a lot of similarities, and I'm sure Lauren will also be able to address that point as well. Finally, on the point of what's going on here in Greenburgh, I want to say that I can't comment specifically on any of these establishments. We drove just by one on the way over here tonight. We certainly didn't stop in, but just from the outside, it had some of the telltale signs of places that I investigated in the Burlington area. I arrived in Vermont, in the Burlington area from western Montana back in October of 2002. And shortly after I arrived, probably about 6 months later, I received a tip that there was one of these kind of massage places where prostitution, that's the way it was put to me, prostitution is going on. And, oh, by the way, we believe that maybe some of the local cops might be regular customers. Now, at the time, I was brand new to Burlington. I was in the process of trying to create a news department in a very small newspaper. 7 Days is an alt weekly, which if you're familiar with the Village Voice or the Chicago Reader or the Boston Phoenix, Seattle Weekly, sort of in that vein. And so I was hired to essentially create a news department. And so I get to Burlington, and of course, 6 months later, I'm told that some of the local police may be frequenting a brothel. Needless to say, I was a little bit gun-shy about taking on that story. And so at this point, I'm a little bit ashamed to admit I sat on the story. I didn't really do anything with it. And about a year later, there were 3 law enforcement agencies along with the FBI and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They went in and they raided the place. And they arrested 8 women, 3 of whom admitted to performing sex acts for money. And the police at the time, they had been investigating for a little while. I'm not sure whether or not they sent anyone in undercover, either officially or not. But I do know that the detective who I spoke to years later about the case, this was the same, by the way, the same place that I had gotten the tip on. And he said to me, basically he told me that they wrote the women violations. All 8 of them were undocumented workers in the country illegally, and they had they wrote them a citation to appear in Boston in immigration court, which is about 250 miles away, and then released them. There was also another woman, the madam or mama-san, as they're sometimes called in these places, and she was also cited. She subsequently fled the country. A month later, unsurprisingly, none of these women showed up in immigration court, and as this detective told me years later, our case came to a screeching halt. And so what was very clear to me and was very clear to him at the time was that the law enforcement community was definitely inexperienced at dealing with this. They clearly had gotten no training, as he admitted. They had never been trained in recognizing human trafficking, and they had, quite frankly, as he put it, we confused the victims with the perpetrators. And they assumed that these women were prostitutes, and that's how they were reported in the press. These are prostitutes. These were not prostitutes. These were women who were being prostituted against their will. We can call them sex workers. They were essentially sex trafficking victims. So while I was in Vermont, from there, this would have been 2003, 2004, I wound up doing a story about some of the Mexican farm workers who were working in Vermont's dairy industry. As you probably know, the cow is Vermont's official state animal, and up to this point, most people just assumed that Vermont dairy farmer was a white guy in overalls, probably in his mid-50s, and his sort of plump wife next to him with a pitchfork, and that was the image of who a dairy farmer was in Vermont. I discovered, and maybe it shouldn't have come as any great shock to anyone, but it did, that the dairy industry in Vermont is essentially, the work done on the farms is done by undocumented Mexican workers, predominantly men. Many of them all come from the same town. They still have families back in Mexico, and they work 80 to 90 hours a week. Unlike the undocumented workers in a place like Texas or Arizona or California, where there's large communities of Latino people who all speak the language, oftentimes this is one man living on a farm alone in a trailer, or two or maybe three, and they may share the same bed and work alternating hours. And at that time, they had a practice of never leaving the farm, and not because they didn't have the time, although they probably didn't really have the time. But the only reason they would leave the reason they would not leave the farm is because if they did, they would stand out. Because if any of you have ever been to Vermont, you may have noticed that it is one of the widest places in the country, second widest only behind Maine. And so the local police sort of had an unofficial policy that if they saw somebody who looked like he was Latino walking along the road, they essentially stopped him and checked his immigration status, and more times than not, he would be deported. So these men never left the farm. And in fact, we found out later, too, that they would also traffic women in to service these men because, of course, they never left. They had nothing else going on there. So that was another variety of human trafficking that I came across. Up until that point, no one had ever even spoken about these people. And, I'm proud to say today that not only are Mexican farm workers recognized in the state, they can get driver's licenses, they can get access to health care. They have even testified in the state legislature, even men who have no immigration status whatsoever. Furthermore, the state police, along with many of the local law enforcement, including the Burlington Police Department, Middlebury Police, and several other agencies, now have a policy that they will not ask undocumented workers about if they encounter somebody that they suspect is in the country illegally, they will not ask about their immigration status unless they are accused or suspected of a crime. So the reason they adopted that policy is that they wanted these men, if they are being victimized, if they're being taken advantage of in any way, if they're being beaten or having money stolen from them, that they're not afraid to call 911. So that was actually a pretty good change. Another time I encountered a I learned that there was essentially slave labor going on in a chain of Chinese restaurants. These were basically Chinese buffets, and the people who worked in them were all Chinese nationals. Most of them had no idea where they were. They knew they were in the United States. They generally spoke no English. And when I visited the place where they lived, I found about 26 primarily Chinese laborers all living in a boarding house which had no active fire extinguishers, smoke alarms. It had one bathroom for both the men and women, one toilet, one shower, no door, and the workers were padlocked in their rooms every night. Now, this boarding house was visible from the town hall. You could look out the window and you could see the town hall from there. Now, I'm not saying this was anyone's fault that they didn't notice them, but I'm sure Lauren will address this point, is that the one thing that makes that all these human trafficking cases seem to have in common is that these people are invisible, that we don't see them because we either choose not to or we're just never made aware that they're there. And those who are aware of them often have no incentive. In fact, it's quite a disincentive to point out the fact that, oh, by the way, these people who are living here are in the country illegally and working for just tips and nothing more. And then we get to, of course, the massage parlors. And I'll tell you just really briefly, so after my initial experience of really not reporting on these places, in May of 2013, the Bennington police, in a similar type raid as to what happened, sounds like what happened here, the Bennington police, along with the FBI, raided 2 of these Asian massage parlors, as we'll kind of refer to them. And they went in, they confiscated computers and cell phones and large amounts of cash. And unsurprisingly, the women who were working in there refused services, even though none of them spoke English. There were some who were not in the country legally. There were no criminal prosecutions, and of course the people who owned them were nowhere to be found, and these places closed up for a short period of time and then they went away. And the police, you know, I can't really fault the Bennington police for how they handled the case. As I understand it, and I'm sure your police chief can do a much better job than I in terms of addressing this, these are not local problems in many respects. Most of these places are connected in some way to some larger criminal syndicate. And the local law enforcement agencies have neither the staff nor the resources to actually do the kind of investigations it takes to ferret out those folks. And quite frankly, as several cops have told me from time to time, and I feel like I have a pretty good relationship with them by now, when they have a choice between what it is they prioritize, if they prioritize the proverbial happy ending in a massage parlor or a child sex abuse case, this is a no-brainer. If they are experiencing a large number of break-ins, as Vermont has experienced in recent years, that are due to heroin trafficking because people got addicted by taking prescription painkillers, then they will investigate the heroin trafficking, and so they will take care of that problem, and then that will make the burglaries go away and the car break-ins go away. And so the trafficking kind of gets pushed to the back because, as one state's attorney put it, well, nobody's complaining about it. And it's true, nobody does complain about it. And but I knew that there were these women in these places. I had read about trafficking, and I had, you know, I knew a little bit. I was certainly no expert on it. But I thought the one thing that stood out about the Bennington case to me is that they had not sent anyone into these places, and so they had really no evidence. And so I said, all right, well, these are legal at this point. These are presumably legal businesses, and anyone has a right to go into them, walk in, and you know, I can go in, I can get a massage. Let me just see what happens. And so I want to go into it. And I'll kind of just walk you through what my experience was like. I've been into a total of 6 of these places. Several of them I've gone back to just to see whether I get treated any differently. I will say that in my experience, they are as alike as Starbucks. There are certain red flags that I came to learn later by talking to experts on human trafficking. There are certain red flags that you look for. And maybe your police chief can tell me whether or not he's seen any or all of these red flags. So, I would walk up to these places, and the first thing I would notice is that they all had a sticker on their door which said, "We support Vermont State Police," or "We support our local Police Benevolence Association." Every one of them. I went to 6 different places. Every one of them had one of these stickers. It was sort of like a totem they put on the door, which basically said, "We're okay. There's no reason for you to come in here." But just to be on the safe side, all of them keep their doors locked. And they either have a buzzer on them, you have to be buzzed in, or somebody will come over, kind of eyeball you a little bit, look you in the eye, and like, "Okay, yeah, he looks like he's okay." And then they'll let you in. We did send women up to some of these places. They never got in. So clearly this was not a place where they wanted women to be walking in. And then once you come inside, you're greeted by the madam or the mama-san. And they may have a sticker on the door which says Visa, MasterCard accepted, which they never do. These are all cash businesses. And they'll generally ask you, they'll say, "Hello, you here for a massage?" "Sure." "Okay, $80. And so you hand over your cash, and I sort of made it a point always to ask for a receipt because this was work and I was going to be reimbursed for this. And they always sort of, they always smiled and laughed and shook their head no, and of course, I knew that that was not going to happen. And they would take the money and they would either tuck it in their bra, or more often than not, they would put it into some sort of drop box behind the counter so that the money would fall into the floor, so that if they did get raided, maybe they had some time to kind of squirrel it away. And then I would go in and they would introduce me to whoever the masseuse was who was going to presumably service me for the hour or so. And you go in and it looks like a sort of there's a normal table and all that. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here, since we're in Westchester, that maybe 1 or 2 of you have had a professional massage before, once or twice. I assure you this is not like anything you've ever had at a legitimate massage parlor. For example, I'm sure you've never had somebody come over and say, "Can I give you a shower?" Yes, they have a table shower. And it is exactly what it sounds like. You take off your clothes and you lay down on a table naked, and they lather you up and get into all the nooks and crannies and, basically towel you off, and then you go for your massage. I always declined that. It always seemed a little too creepy. But that is true. I have an idea. So anyway, the massages that I would get would range anywhere from, not bad to atrocious. What was always strange is that if you've ever had a legitimate massage, there's usually a very clear line between, what is sort of off limits and what's not. And certainly I would always, I would strip down. If I were still wearing my underwear, they would tell me to take it off. If I put the sheet over me, which is pretty standard courtesy if I'm being, massaged by a female masseuse, I would certainly cover myself. They would always sort of giggle and yank it off and maybe slap my butt or something like that. And what I came to learn is that all of this is sort of part of a ritual that they engage in because they want me to feel at home, they want me to feel comfortable, and they want me to come back. The other thing that I didn't realize and only learned later by talking to some of these women was that the only money they make is what I would tip them. So if I come in and I pay my $80, none of that $80 goes to me. It goes to presumably whoever owns the business. And if I choose to be really stingy and not give her anything, then she didn't make anything for the hour of that service. And so, I get the normal massage, and at some point, they tell you, towards the end of the hour, they tell you to flip over. And as I had learned, and I had done a little bit of research before I went into these places, Marty mentioned Backpage.com. The site that we used to do our research was a place called rubmaps.com. And this is a website. It's operated out of California. It has still never been shut down. But their slogan is, "Find your happy ending." Now, for $29.99 or whatever the fee is now, you basically go on to this website, and you can look up in your area where you can get your proverbial happy ending. And this website will give you information like, what is the nationality or the presumed nationality of the women who are working there, what do they look like, and what do services cost. And by services, I mean sexual favors. And they will also say, they will basically describe in detail what these women will and will not do. So will they give you a hand job? Will they give you oral sex? Will they perform full sex? And the men will even write reviews of them. So this is clearly a very well-organized industry. This site is not operated by, as far as I understand it, is not operated by the massage parlors themselves, but all of these places will show up, and I would not be at all surprised if any of these places are on any of the places that you've been dealing with here in your community would show up here. So anyway, at some point, Rub Maps will tell you that at some point on the flip, which means you turn over and reveal yourself, and that's the point at which, presumably, if sex is going to take place in any way, then it does. Now, I was pretty naive going in, and I assumed, okay, so if I don't indicate anything, if I don't sort of flash a 50 or kind of, wink, wink, or point suggestively to my groin, then maybe nothing's going to happen. And I was wrong. I turn over, and they kind of immediately grab you. At which point, as I made clear to my editors and to our attorney at the newspaper, and most importantly to my wife, that I would neither solicit nor accept any sexual favors, for a variety of legal and ethical reasons, marital reasons. Now, saying no, and I didn't know this at the time, and I kind of learned as I went along, but saying no is incredibly revealing, because you could look in their face and you, at that point, are able to see sort of a quick range of emotions go through their face. And the first emotion is confusion. I don't understand what this, everybody who comes in for some sort of sexual favor. And then the second emotion is embarrassment. I shouldn't have done this. I touched him where I shouldn't have. And then probably the prevailing emotion that they experience is fear. And the fear is obvious. I'm either law enforcement, I'm immigration. In some way, they have done something wrong. I know they've done something wrong. I didn't solicit anything. Now what? And I always felt uncomfortable and sort of embarrassed myself, and I always reassured them, no, please don't, no reason for you to, be embarrassed, perfectly honest mistake, sorry, I'm married, At which point I was able to talk to them more and get a little bit more honest conversation from them. And I always try to engage them in conversation, because obviously I couldn't be sitting there, I didn't run a tape recorder, I didn't wear a wire, and I couldn't scribble notes. So I had to, as best as possible, try to elicit information from people who often spoke little or no English. But the women who did speak English, it was very telling. I would ask them, for example, so when are you, if I want to come back, when are you here? Oh, every day. Okay, no, but I mean, what days? No, I'm here every day. Okay. So if I come on Sunday, you'll be here? Yeah. What time? All day. All day. So anytime. So essentially, these women are sex workers who work 7 days a week, who are on call anytime that open sign is on outside. And as I discovered, one of these places was about 90-second walk from the front door of my office. I drove by this place every single day for 10 years. And I used to notice the open sign and then never really gave it much thought until I went in there and realized actually what was going on. And so these women are there, and any time from 9 a.m. in the morning till 11 o'clock at night, they could be asked to or expected to service men. The ones in the Burlington area generally receive very light traffic, which somebody in law enforcement told me privately suggests that they may just be fronts for laundering money for other criminal activities. We never found clear evidence of that. But what was clear to me was that all these women are essentially slaves. And so I would always ask them, where do you live? And I remember one of the women who spoke pretty good English, she was Korean. And I said, where do you live? She says, here. And I said, here, Essex Junction, which is the town I was in. She's like, no, here. And she meant she lived in the business. And as I came to discover, all the places that I visited, the women lived on the premises, which is why they had video cameras. The video cameras were as much to watch them as it was to watch me. So could these women walk out the door? Sure, they could. But how far are they going to go? They don't even know where they are. Some of the doors are locked, sometimes they're not. I remember one woman that I met. I remember she seemed very playful and fun, and you certainly wouldn't, if you met her, you would not think, oh, this is a trafficking victim. She seemed very playful, and she really kind of wanted to engage me. And I remember asking her, I said, where are you from? And she says, Seoul, South Korea. And I said, oh, so how long have you been in the States? And she said that she had been here for about 10 years, and she had lived in Manhattan. And then she moved up to Williston, Vermont. Now, if you've never been to Williston, Vermont, which I'm sure most of you have never been, Williston, Vermont is what we call box store hell. Okay, there's the Walmart, and there's the Staples, and there's the various fast food places. And so I asked this woman, I said, oh, so are you a country girl or a city girl? And she giggled and she said, city girl. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, so here's a Korean woman, young, attractive. She seems intelligent. And she grew up in Seoul, South Korea, and then she spent 10 years living in Manhattan. And she one day willingly decides to move up to box store hell to work in this really seedy, rundown place on the side of the road where she services men for whatever tip she happens to get. And to me, that was the clearest evidence that I could see that this woman was not here under her own volition. No woman who describes herself as a city girl is going to move to Williston, Vermont, and work in this little dark, windowless place where she lives in the back room, and there isn't even a sidewalk outside. And so that was clear to me that this woman owes somebody or some organization a serious amount of money. I don't know whether it was to get her into the country or to get her family into the country, or she had pissed off the wrong people at some point, but clearly this woman was not here on her own. Anyway, so we finish up, you walk out, they hand you candies on the way out, which is also pretty standard, and they often will tell you things like, next time you can come to the back door, ring the buzzer. Now, if you're a legitimate business and you're engaged in legitimate activities, you generally don't have to tell people to come in the back so that they're not seen, but obviously they know that they don't want to be seen. The customers don't want to be seen. The story comes out in June of 2013, and within 2 hours of the story hitting the street, the place that I drove by every single day was gone. I mean, closed up. The woman or women who worked there were completely disappeared. The first time in 10 years that I had driven by the place where the open sign was not on that morning. A few days later, another one of the places I wrote about, they had a for lease sign. I don't know what happened to the women who were working in there either. And there was the third place, the one where the city girl from Seoul had been working. That one hung on for about 10 days. And then the rest of the Vermont Press Corps kind of jumped on the story, and TV cameras started showing up. And the local state's attorney, basically our DA, sent letters to every one of these establishments saying to them, and more importantly, the property owners, and I don't know whether this is something that has happened here, but our state's attorney sent letters to all of these business owners and the landlords saying, you are on notice. If we find criminal activity in these establishments, you will be held criminally liable. That shut them down. And subsequently, local law enforcement in Williston made an arrest. They arrested the landlord. He was charged with indecent acts or tolerating indecent acts. He actually had one of these women living in his home. He was about a 70-year-old man, and he cooperated. He pled guilty. But as far as what happened to these women, I don't know. I gave the state police, somebody who worked on human trafficking issues, I gave him a 36-hour heads up on this. I also notified one of the local anti-trafficking organizations. Due to, it was just a fluke, the law enforcement I contacted, he had a death in the family. He didn't get the message until after the story appeared. And these women were all disappeared. From what I'm told, these women, and I'm told by experts who work in this, people from a group called the Polaris Project, which is down in Washington, D.C. These women often, when their businesses are shut down and they're closed, they have to pay their own way to their next place. The story came out, and I went away for a week, and when I came back, I visited another establishment, which I hadn't been in, and I remember talking to the woman, and I asked her how long she'd been here, and she said 24 hours. I said, really? Why is that? And she said, well, they cleaned house. She said everybody who'd been working there before was taken out, and they brought in a new crew. And what I'd been told was that is pretty standard, that they will move these women around from time to time. So they don't establish any roots in the community. They establish no connections in the community. And essentially what happens is if a place gets shut down, whichever syndicate or business criminal element is running them, they see that as the cost of doing business, and they shuttle these women off to another place. I have no idea whatever happened to any of the women that I spoke to, but I do know, I've been told that there are more than 4,000 of these brothels in the United States. And in many of the communities in which they operate, local law enforcement are either understaffed or don't have the expertise or the resources to devote to shutting them down. I'm sure Lauren can tell you much better than I can that it is extremely difficult to get any of these women to cooperate with investigations, primarily because they have no incentive to. Many of them are undocumented, so they have no incentive to get their own bosses in trouble, because even if they do, they're still going to owe this criminal syndicate money. So this bondage, while they may not be technically locked in or chained as we would envision slaves to be locked in, although they are sometimes, I'm told that does occasionally happen. Their bondage is primarily through isolation, both language isolation and cultural isolation. They don't know anyone in the community. They don't know where they are, and they really have no opportunity to get out and really, it's kind of jarring when you notice, you look in the bathroom and you realize, okay, there's a shower in there and there's all these women's products, and you look on the roof of the building and there's a chair out there, and you realize that's probably the only time this woman ever gets outside. So that's been my experience. Again, I'm not an expert. I've just encountered this stuff along the way, and I wish I could say to you that there is some kind of silver bullet that would solve the problem here. I know that in Vermont, going after the landlords was effective in one case, but I do also know that several of these places have since opened up, and I've started to look into them and also find out how these women are getting here, and trying to find out who the owners of these businesses are. What was surprising to me recently is I discovered that one of these businesses that just opened up in the last year is actually owned by the same person, a Korean woman, or at least she is listed on the Secretary of State's business papers. She owned two of the places that I was able to get shut down, and she also owned the two places in Bennington, Vermont, which were also shut down by police. Now, it seems I'm dumbfounded as to why the Secretary of State would give them permission to open another business of the same kind. I know in some other communities around the country that's been one way that communities have dealt with it is if you come in and you have past convictions for prostitution or indecent acts or whatever your state happens to call these kind of criminal activities, you can't open your business. They just don't allow it. There have been some communities that have been able to get these places shut down or limit their hours of operation. They've said that you can't live on the premises. They've had inspections, periodic inspections from the health department. And so they use all sorts of ways, also using the tax laws and making sure that they're paying their taxes, which when it's an all-cash business is very difficult to prove. So anyway, that's my experiences. I'm going to let these folks talk. I probably talked way too long, but thank you very much. Good luck.
Thank you, Ken. I'm going to ask if you have any questions to hold until after all of our speakers, and then you can, within the time constraints we have, ask anyone anything you want. I'd like to turn now to Chris McNerney, Chief of Police of Greenburgh.
Good evening. My name is Chris McNerney. I'm the Chief of Police at Town of Greenburgh. I've been the Chief since December 2013. Prior to that, I was the Commanding Officer of the Detective Division, and I oversaw numerous investigations, including several that involved the massage establishments in the town. I'm going to back up. Over the last 10 to 15 years, the Town of Greenburgh has made numerous arrests at the massage establishments in the town for prostitution-related offenses and for licensing-related offenses. In 2012, we undertook an 11-month investigation. This was a multi-agency investigation that involved the New York State Attorney General's Office, the Federal Department of Homeland Security, the Westchester County District Attorney's Office, and the Greenburgh Police. With that investigation, we approached it with an eye towards human trafficking. We believed that there could be a human trafficking element in these establishments, and that's why we got Homeland Security on board. So at the end of the 11 months, we raided 7 establishments simultaneously. We detained 32 women that were working at these establishments, and they were interviewed by Department of Homeland Security agents, all separately isolated, by agents that were trained in human trafficking, debriefings. We had interpreters there, and they did not disclose that there was a human trafficking element in our establishments. Now, that does not mean that it was not there. It was not disclosed to us. So out of the 32 women that we detained, we arrested 19 women for the unauthorized practice of a profession, which is a Class E felony punishable by 4 years in jail. And we took that approach having evidence that there was prostitution occurring at these establishments. Our challenge is meeting the prosecution's burden of proof to go forward with a prostitution prosecution. It's a bit of a tongue twister. But that was our burden, and that was our challenge. And as mentioned earlier, it's very difficult for law enforcement to go into one of these establishments and hide a mic when they have to get naked, and without compromising investigative techniques that we use, these women are getting better at their craft as arrests go on, and we believe that they're part of a big network that ranges up and down the East Coast. We think they originate out of Flushing, Queens. They're getting better and better at their craft. So we don't have the same opportunities to arrest that we did the first time and the second time that we arrested them. So we have focused on the unauthorized practice of a profession. It's been efficient and it's been effective. And we have met the burden that has been required by the district attorney's office, and we've been able to close them, but only temporarily. So in 2014, I recommended to the town board that the town of Greenburgh enact local legislation to address the prostitution and educational offenses that were occurring at these establishments. I did this because we have absolutely no authority to close them down permanently, as the law stands. We've tried to go after landlords in New York State. Unless there's a drug-related offense, we can't seize them from illegal activities. So in doing our homework, talking to other municipalities, finding out how it's been addressed, one way was establishing a local law. So I know that it was established in Clarkstown. I heard earlier that they have several that have reopened. I don't know how long they've been open, but in talking to my contemporaries in Rockland County, it has been extremely effective. So a local law was drafted. I got a copy of Rockland County's. Edgemont resident Bob Bernstein, I believe, got a model from a Nassau County municipality. It was tweaked a little bit. Rockland County's was tweaked by myself and the town attorney a little bit, and the law that Mr. Bernstein proposed, I thought was a better law, and I recommended it to the town board. And that's where we are today. We're trying to get this law enacted. There are some hurdles. There are, when you get enough attorneys together, the greatest legal minds will disagree. You know, and that's just the way it is. We have arguments on both sides. I see them both. So where we are with the local law, I'm hopeful that it's going to be enacted soon. There's been a slight delay. I don't think that's fatal to our mission, our goal. We're not going to ignore this. Just on March 6th, March 5th, we raided 6 of our local establishments. We made 11 arrests. They were all for the unauthorized practice of a profession. And we were able to shut the establishments down, but again, only temporarily. So we are not going to back away from this. We're committed to addressing this quality of life issue. It's a public safety, health, and welfare issue, and the town of Greenburgh Police Department's committed to addressing it. I just wanted to address some of the things that Ken had mentioned. We find a lot of similarities between these establishments. We don't see police stickers in the doors. That's one thing that we don't see. But we do have establishments that do have buzzers. One complaint that we've received over the years has been from women who have gone to the establishments and were told that they do not perform massages on women. They accept Visa and MasterCard, but they're rarely, if ever, used. We find that the men do not want to trail that they've visited these establishments. I received a complaint from a woman who remained anonymous, but said that her husband had a recent injury. This was a recent complaint. Her husband had a recent injury and said that he needed to go to the massage parlor to get massaged. The doctor recommended it. So there was a credit card bill with this massage establishment that was listed on it regularly. And we received a complaint because she went down there to ask about it. And she wasn't happy with what she found. So in our investigation that concluded in 2013, where we raided 7 places, we detained 32 individuals and arrested 19. All but one individual that we detained was here legally. INS was able to confirm that on the scene. So that was something that was a concern, a little bit of a surprise that they were all here legally, but that was the case. We do have several legitimate spas in the town. We did stop and inspect their licenses. and they were all in compliance, the ones that we did check. So we know that there's criminal activity. There were some websites mentioned before. We're on some of those paid websites. We're monitoring them, and we know that what crimes are occurring there. But like I said, we have had our challenges, but we're committed to moving forward. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Is it all right if I sit here? Can you hear me? You're all right? It's up. Is that good? So I'm just happy to talk more informally. I'm Lauren Pesso. I'm the director of the Human Trafficking Program at My Sister's Place. How many people here, I know some of you, I recognize a few of you. How many people know about My Sister's Place? How many people knew that in addition to working on domestic violence, we work on human trafficking? About half of you. Okay, so My Sister's Place co-founded an anti-trafficking task force in Westchester County in 2010, along with the district attorney's office, our colleagues at the Pound Ridge Police Department, where a human trafficking case was uncovered in 2009, and a partner organization called the International Organization for Adolescence, which was founded by a Pound Ridge resident who happens also to be an expert on human trafficking, who's been working in the field for 15 or 20 years. I joined My Sister's Place actually in 2010 to help start the human trafficking program. We'd been working with trafficking survivors for many years before that, but didn't have a formal program to address the issue. And as I was talking with some of you earlier, we learned that my mom and some of these folks grew up in Brooklyn in the same building. I'm from Brooklyn myself. I live there now. When I took this job in 2010, I did not anticipate that it would be a very long job, because I thought human trafficking in Westchester, there's not going to be a lot of cases. I'll do this for a little while and then move on to something else. And what I learned very quickly, unfortunately, is that once you put yourself out there as a human trafficking services provider, people start coming. So we started getting calls pretty consistently once we opened our doors as a formal human trafficking services provider. We work with survivors of all forms of human trafficking, and I'm glad that the opening to this, I'm glad I was invited to be here, and that there's an openness to talking not only about sex trafficking, not only about women, not only about massage parlors. I'm not an expert on massage parlors at all. But we work with survivors of trafficking who've been trafficked into virtually every industry. So some of the industries that people we work with have been trafficked into. They're nannies and au pairs. They're other kinds of domestic workers, house cleaners, working in small businesses, working in casinos, in restaurants, bars, country clubs, brothels, engaged in sex work on the street. I mean, really, any industry you can imagine, we've seen clients our clients of ours have been trafficked into those industries. We work with men, women. We don't work typically with children, but we have partner organizations that do. But people of all sexes, genders, nationalities, anybody can be trafficked, and we're seeing that among the clients that we're working with at My Sister's Place. In the last 4 or 5 years, we've provided some kind of direct services, and I'll talk about what those are, to over 100 people who've been trafficked, and we've provided some sort of consultation on more like 250 cases. So this is happening here, and I think we know it's happening here, but I'm here to tell you it is. A lot of the clients we work with are identified and have been trafficked here in Westchester. I can't say necessarily in Greenburgh, but certainly in Westchester County or in surrounding counties. Many of our clients also were trafficked into New York City and then come up to Westchester for safety reasons. They need to get out of the city, or they have family here. Sometimes we work with people who've been identified through raids, whether it's a local police department or the FBI or Homeland Security. But more often, people come to us seeking help. They've been out of a trafficking situation for years, but they've been really living on the edge and had no idea that help was available. And then somebody told somebody, and they realized that there was some help. So just to give you a sense of the kind of services we offer, and then I'll talk about some more specifically some of the kinds of cases we've seen. We provide emergency shelter for survivors of domestic violence and human trafficking. We have confidentially located shelters in Westchester. We have free immigration and family law services services. We have free counseling services. All of our services are free. Children's counseling services. We have a specific human trafficking program that works with trafficking survivors to ensure that they get their needs met, whether it's, yes, we connect them with shelters and attorneys very quickly, but also so many of the clients we work with come to us with just the clothes on their back. So we're able to we have some funding so we can provide clothing, phone cards for them to call their families. They may not have been able to communicate with family members for years. Transportation to get to and from appointments. Sometimes it's a bicycle to get around. I mean, really, there are tons of needs, medical needs, mental health needs, helping connect them with counselors, dental needs. I mean, the needs run the gamut because a lot of the people we work with have been forced into physical labor. They haven't been able to seek medical help. They've been physically assaulted, sexually assaulted by their traffickers, regardless of what kind of industry they were trafficked into. So there's a lot of concrete needs that a lot of our clients have when they're immediately identified, and we're helping to meet some of those needs. And then I'll also talk about what some of the needs are over time. And then I'd love to talk also about some of what we've learned from colleague organizations around the country about these kinds of raids and working together, law enforcement and service providers, and how we might be able to help. And, it's true in my experience and that of my colleagues around the country who are doing this work with victims, many times you're not going to have people identified through a raid who admit to being a victim of human trafficking. It's very rare, actually, that upon the first interaction, especially if that interaction is with law enforcement, no matter how sensitive that law enforcement official is, and I know that there are so many who are sensitive to this issue, people are typically terrified of law enforcement for sometimes good reasons, especially if they're coming from countries where law enforcement is not safe. So some of the best practices I'll share now, and then we'll get to some of the clients we've worked with. Some of the best practices that we know, especially from colleagues who've done this work for much longer than we have, is how important it is to have service providers, engage service providers and attorneys ahead of time if you can, when you know you're going to do a raid. And we've worked with some partners at the FBI and others on this in this way in other situations, so that we might be able to come and be an outside person there to speak with potential victims. We're not law enforcement. We're not interested in arresting you, deporting you. We have no association with them. We're just here to tell you about who we are, what our services are, and you can come back. If you don't want them now, at least you know we're here. And we have heard that this sometimes helps. It doesn't always help, but sometimes this helps in getting people more comfortable. And also, if you can connect them with services, whether they're identifying as a victim or not, sometimes over time you help them get a little bit more comfortable. They're in a safe place. They're out of the trafficking situation. They're in a shelter. They're in a safe place. They're getting food. They're getting to speak with somebody in their own language, communicating with family. Sometimes we find that in a week, in a month, maybe in a year, they're willing to cooperate on an investigation and they wouldn't have before. So again, this, you never know, but these are things that we know have worked elsewhere. And connecting someone, offering someone right after a raid, offering them free legal advice and assistance immediately, not from law enforcement, is also known to be a best practice, to have somebody understand what their rights are, that they might be a victim. Sometimes we've heard that also helps. And again, you never know. You can't force somebody to identify as a victim, and we don't know that these people are, but my suspicion is that some of them are. But I can't speak to, I have not worked with clients who've been trafficked into massage parlors, so I can't speak to that, but I can speak to some other kinds of cases. And a lot of the cases that we work on involve overlaps between domestic violence and human trafficking, where unfortunately the trafficker is a family member, whether it's a spouse or a mother-in-law or a father-in-law. So a couple of cases I can think of, and then I can share a few that have just come in the last week, because I want to give a sense of the kinds of calls we're getting pretty frequently. But one case I can share was two sisters, actually, from a South Asian country who were brought here for arranged marriages. They were quite young. They were teenagers, but this was normal in their culture, and that itself wasn't particularly alarming. But when they came to this country to be married, there was the mother-in-law. They were actually married to brothers, and the mother-in-law, who had agreed with the family in the home country that these people would be able to go to school, these young women would be able to go to school, get jobs. This seemed like a really a positive arrangement for them. When they got here, they're not allowed to go to school. They're not allowed to work. They're forced outside, but they're forced to work in the home and in a family business. Eventually, one of them was only 16, and because of family pressure from in her home country, she was allowed to go to school, but they were being physically abused by the mother-in-law. And forced into labor for very long hours and not being paid. And it was actually a guidance counselor at her school that identified that something was going on and eventually was able to connect her with services, and they got out of this family and were able to be in shelter together. And then this was a couple of years ago that we got this referral. And now they're living together, but still quite vulnerable, still very afraid of the family. The family, they suspect the family might still know where they are. The family here that they were living with has been threatening family members in their home country, and one of their brothers has actually been on the run for over a year because they've been threatening him. That these two sisters went to the police, reported what was happening to the police, and there was an investigation. And I think this speaks to one of the fears that a lot of clients have about reporting to the police, even when they want something to happen and they want to seek justice. Once the family that was trafficking them understood that they were the ones who reported this to the police, they're threatening family members back home. And so there was a clear link. It was obvious when there's a single victim or two victims, it's always obvious who's making this report to the police. So there are real, I think, there are real valid fears that a lot of the clients we work with have about working with police and reporting to police. And even when they come forward, there are some valid safety concerns that they have. Another really different kind of example, we've been working for a number of years with an ever-growing number of men who are also from South and different South Asian country. They came to the United States to work in country clubs, and they came through a labor broker, and it seemed like a legitimate business. They spent a lot of money to get their visas and to come here and to work. When they got here, the work situation was not at all what they expected. They were forced to live in very, very tiny quarters in their places of business. They were also forced to pay for those living quarters out of their pretty meager wages. They had a contract, but everything that was in the contract was not ultimately what they were paid. They were not physically forced to stay, but they were watched. There were people, essentially overseers, who were watching their movements, and they felt that they couldn't leave. They were also told, if you do leave, you'll be deported, you'll be arrested. So there was real fear that kept them in these working conditions. In this situation, one person left, and then eventually when they realized they could leave, they sort of trickled out. But this trafficking, this exploitation happened many, many years ago, and we're getting referrals of these clients still now. They're trickling in because one person gets help, and then they realize that, well, actually, we had no idea what happened to us was really a crime. We knew it didn't feel right, but we didn't know it was a crime here. We didn't know we had any rights. We didn't want to come forward. We're now out of legal status, even though they all came actually legally. They had legal working visas, but once they fell out of legal status, that was another reason for them to fear coming forward. So with those clients, we're working with them. Our immigration attorneys are working with them because there are particular there are visas available to people who've been trafficked if they're willing to report to law enforcement what happened and cooperate on an investigation. We're helping to get them some training, paying for some training. Each of them, some of them want to remain in the businesses that they came here. They're working in restaurants, but some of them want to do totally different things. So for some of those clients, we're helping to support them. They want to become a car mechanic, or they want to become a chef. And so this requires resources, but we have some funds where we're helping them to meet some of those goals. But it's a long process. This has been, for years in the making. And just a couple, because, within the last week, I received a call through I think you mentioned Polaris, someone mentioned Polaris Project, which operates a national human trafficking resource center. Well, that resource center gave our office a call last week. There was somebody who'd reached out to them, and to be honest, I don't yet know. I think it was a local police department that had reached out to this resource center. There was a woman who was working as a domestic servant for, I believe it was a diplomat, but we're still trying to sort out the details. And that diplomat family decided they had been holding her, that she had a contract, she wasn't getting what she was supposed to get in the contract, and then they decided, for reasons that are unclear, well, they no longer wanted her to work there, and they just kicked her out of the home. But they said she had to get on a plane within 24 hours and go back to her home country, and they hadn't paid her at all. And so she reached out to the police, and she is potentially interested in going back to her home country, but wants the wages that she was that were withheld from her. And there were other abuses that took place too. So we're just starting to work with this person. And then finally, also within the last week, there was the New York State Department of Labor uncovered potential trafficking among construction workers, all undocumented construction workers. And they actually made a report to the Department of Labor about some abuses that they were experiencing by their employer, and now are really afraid because the employer knows, or they suspect, who made these reports, and the Department of Labor has been investigating. And so we're working with some people who are coming to us extremely fearful. They're being threatened, and they also have not received the wages that they were told they would receive, and there have been other abuses. So these are just some of the kinds of cases that we work on. And our name is My Sister's Place, so I think sometimes people think we only work with women. That's not true. A lot of the clients we work with are men, and people have been exploited in every kind of industry. And what we find is that they often have concrete needs immediately. They want legal assistance, interpretation. I mentioned some of the basics: food, clothing, gift cards to for toiletries, that sort of thing. And then in the longer term, sometimes people are typically not ready. In my experience, don't want therapy immediately or ever. But that, a lot of times people think, oh, these people are so traumatized, they need therapy. That's not typically what people want immediately. Maybe in a year or two it is. But often there are significant medical needs. Many of our clients have thousands of dollars worth of dental work that they need done because they haven't been allowed to go to a dentist, or in a number of cases, traffickers physically assault them and they have teeth knocked out. So these are the kinds of things that not only are they important physically, but for self-esteem. People have difficulty finding jobs if they don't have teeth, if their front tooth is knocked out. This was just the case with the client I was working with. Also, and this I think relates to the practice of these raids, a lot of the clients we work with, particularly those who've been trafficked for sex, have convictions on their records, prostitution-related convictions, sometimes 20, sometimes 10, 20, sometimes from many states, because they've been trafficked into many states. We're lucky in New York State that we have a law that was passed just a couple years ago where people who have convictions on their records, prostitution-related convictions, if it's deemed that they're a sex trafficking victim, they can get those convictions vacated, taken off their records. But it's a long process. It's not easy. And unfortunately, when you have these convictions on your record, it makes it virtually impossible to move forward and get out of the trafficking situation. You can't get a job, you have difficulty getting housing, and there's a whole host of other issues. So I know this is not easy, and I hope maybe we can work together through the anti-trafficking task force locally, because unfortunately, when we're arresting people on prostitution-related charges, we don't know for sure that they're victims, but if we suspect that they might be, what is the benefit of arresting them? What is the benefit? And then they end up just going back and getting additional arrests and moving around. It sounds like a lot of these people are moving around from place to place and continue to get arrested and then go back and do it again. But it's not necessarily they who are kind of masterminding the operations. So I'll leave it with that. I think I'm happy to talk more if people have questions. But we're here. There's always a need for support for clients that we work with. We never have enough funding to support all of their varied needs. There's always needs for, if doctors or dentists who might be willing to provide pro bono services to our clients. There's always creative ways we're looking to help the clients we work with. So I'm open to any of your thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Lauren. We have time for a few questions if someone wants to ask something. Yes?
I wanted to ask Ken Picard, the Vermont dairy farms.
Yeah.
Who are the owners? Are they private family-owned farms or are they corporate kind of entities?
No, these are actually usually family-owned businesses. One of the difficulties that dairy farmers have had is simply finding people who are willing to work for the wages that they can offer. When they'll often advertise these jobs, no Americans will show up, and so they will go to various illegal sources to bring these men in. They are almost exclusively men, generally in their 20s, and there seems to be a couple of towns down in Mexico where a number of them learned that these jobs are here in Vermont. They're, at least they're not seasonal work. It's year-round work. It's pretty grueling. But the businesses are small businesses, and some of the people who own them are decent and they speak Spanish. Others less so. I think it's kind of luck of the draw for them.
Okay, because I just wanted to make a comment after my question that the whole scenario reminds me. I'm a retired social worker. It reminds me of the American problem that has existed for centuries around drug trafficking. And this human trafficking is massively coordinated, just like drug trafficking is. And there's the element of the consumer of the product that is being trafficked that makes it complicated in terms of managing and controlling and reforming. And one last thing, I think that both the victims and the communities that have kind of not been aware or looked the other way need to be informed of what kinds of laws or what kinds of policies that they can access to address, because sometimes the community may keep quiet because they don't know who they could go to, and they may fear reprisals. And victims definitely, as you have all attested to, are in fear of reprisals from because they're vulnerable from one sense or another. So I just want to thank you all for this education, because it opens up the fact that there's more than the issue of community quality of life being threatened by illicit economies in their midst. It's also a massive issue, excuse me, of human victims involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for those comments. Just a couple of quick points to what you just said. You mentioned early on that these are all highly organized. When Chief McNerney said that they found that these places were based out of Flushing, I could have guessed that even before he said it. The places up in Vermont also had connections to Flushing. Now, I know Flushing is a very big place, and there are a lot of people who live there. It's no coincidence that the businesses of questionable repute here in Westchester are also connected. There's also a syndicate down in Atlanta. I think once you go south of Maryland or thereabouts, probably all those businesses are connected. So these are very well organized. On the point of letting people know their rights, I got really lucky on the investigation of the dairy farmers, because I happened to meet somebody whose father, he was a Mexican-American, and his father had been a braceros, one of the bosses out in the fields, had come across the border himself and then became a boss. And instead of him just simply being a Spanish language interpreter for me, he was actually able to speak to these men in the language, really speak to them in a way that even if I spoke fluent Spanish, which I don't, he was able to connect with them. So I could ask a question, he would translate, and he would talk to them for a while, and their initial answer would not be the final answer. He would talk for a while, and then he would find out that these guys were all in the country illegally. So yeah, there are an awful lot of barriers.
I just want to add to that I think that the training is key. I mean, talking about this issue, that's why I come and do these things, because in so many of the cases we work with, it's actually not large criminal syndicates. Sometimes it is, but just as often, it's individual people exploiting other people for their labor, and they're not necessarily associated with, large criminal activities or gangs. So I think we're all in a position to potentially identify this, and it's my hope, and part of why I come to these things also is to make sure that we're thinking about trafficking expansively, and that you can be trafficked into any kind of industry doing any kind of work, because people we encounter all the time may be trafficked, and it's our role as community members to be looking for it. And we do have a task force. I didn't mention, it's not just the groups I mentioned. I mean, we have almost all of the federal law enforcement agencies sit on our task force. We have a number of local police departments, a number of varied social service providers. So there's activity going on here, and there are people who understand this issue. And if it's happening in a town where the local police is not involved in our task force, there's another department, or the DA's office is involved. So there really is a lot going on locally, and it's just a matter of identifying the right people. And my sister's place is certainly a place where people can reach out to and get more information. And we're not always the person that can do it. We don't do investigations, but we know the people who do.
Judith?
Yes, and then I know this gentleman has a question, and so does Mr. Cobb. But I just wanted to, wow, this has just been awesome, the information sharing this evening. And Marty started out by by giving us a broad picture of these issues. And I just wanted to remind us all that, sadly, human trafficking in this country is decades, centuries old. During slavery, free African Americans who lived in various states in the North were involved in human trafficking, being sent back into slavery. Those individuals who were part of the trafficking accepted money, were paid hundreds, thousands of dollars for capturing people who were free. Known freemen who could present their papers and say, I'm here, this is evidence that I'm free, but they were sent back into slavery. And then after slavery, post-Civil War, many of us probably know about the orphan trains, the children, a lot of children from New York, from all over the country, whose parents were killed during the Civil War, were trafficked into farms out in the Midwest to work as little slaves. And that's where the beginnings of our social services agencies came about, Children's Aid Society for one, and others, to protect these children who were caught up in trafficking. So I just want to say that this is again, we are part of this journey of informing each other. And as I'm speaking, I hope that our guest speakers will be thinking of recommendations that they can share with our audience. Again, we're being videotaped, so this is a broader audience, on what we can do to inform our young people, in particular, our young people going off to colleges. What are some of the warning signs? What are some of how can we share, how can we help them to understand, to prepare themselves for dangerous situations where they could get swooped up, kidnapped, and taken away and caught up into a similar situation? So I just want to conclude my comments by saying that along this journey, I had the fortunate opportunity, is very fortunate, to have encountered others who have helped me in preparing for this evening. My sister Lynn, who introduced herself, of course, Marty, Dr. Brenda Smith, who is not able to be with us this evening. She is a former superintendent of Mount Vernon Schools, and she is the non-government representative to the United Nations. She's also on the board of the United Nations Association, United States of America, the Westchester chapter, and she was down in the UN that's where she works, but she was part of a 2-week conference that involved over 13,000 women from around the world who were just here in New York over the last few weeks. And she shared a story about a woman who came to them and said that she was part of trafficking here in Tarrytown, a domestic worker, a forced domestic worker. So it is here in our own backyard. And then I'm going to acknowledge Lena Anderson, who is our president of the NAACP for White Plains and Greenburgh. But I also want to share that in preparing for this evening, a friend of mine, I shared with a friend of mine that my sister and I had been invited to a Seder tomorrow evening. And she is of the Jewish faith and culture. And she said, Judy, I want you to share. I cannot be there tonight. I wish I could be there. She said, but the significance of Passover and one of the most significant aspects of Seder is the message. If one of us is not free, none of us is free. And she said that can also be applied to what is going on with human trafficking. If one of us is not free, none of us are free. Thank you to our guest speakers. I'm going to turn the evening back over to Marty, our moderator, but I also wish to acknowledge Lena Anderson in the audience. Again, she is the president of the White Plains Greenburgh NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored Peoples.
Thank you for that, Judy. May I ask a question? Sure.
We have three questions here. Steve, we'll take yours, and then we'll take yours.
All right,
Then we'll take you.
With respect to the massage parlors, it seems to me it's a whack-a-mole situation. You close one down, another one opens. It's a losing battle. You're dealing with, or you're treating the symptoms and not the cause. I know it's anathema to a lot of people, but if you really want to attack the cause, you got to talk about whether we should legalize prostitution the way that it's done in many other countries. You take the profit motive out of that trafficking of sex workers.
Thank you. Yes?
I'm thankful for the comments Judy made in terms of historical foundation. And I'm so glad to see you from my sister's place, because I was thinking as the chief was talking, you have a natural interest in preventing crime that lets trafficking rise to the top in terms of prostitution. But where we have the other trafficking issues, I want to know as a community advocate, what is the process by which we can talk about nail salons when we see that they are obviously oppressed? And we go from salon to salon and we see how at the end of the day, their tips are taken and they're gathered up in these cars and they're taken to Jersey or Queens or whatever. It's obvious that something is not right, but what they're doing is not inherently illegal. They're doing nails and running businesses. What do we say to people who are nannies and who may share in a sidebar that they're tired of that, they're not being treated fair, they're not being paid at all, etc.? What's the process as community people that we should go through to report or to in some way get them support? Because if I say, well, you could go to my sister's place, they're afraid. If I report it, they're still afraid. The chief, you could go talk to them and they just may not talk to you. So please give us some strategies that are realistic for how to deal with it as community members.
I certainly don't have them, but I'll certainly like to think about them and maybe get back to you.
Okay.
Yes?
Can I just say something
Yes, please.
to respond to that? And then I know there's another question, but I think you're right that people are afraid to come forward. And I also think we have to be careful. We don't want, I mean, Ken, you're a journalist who really researched what you're doing, and we don't think we want the message to be all of us should be going out and investigating these potentially, illegal businesses, because that can be unsafe for you, but it can also potentially be unsafe for if there are victims there who are being watched, and I don't know that was the case at all in the places where you went. But it's really tricky, and that's why I think it's particularly tricky, because so many of the victims that may be here in Westchester are, in private homes or private businesses where it's not that easy to access them. Our task forces had different ideas. Without funding, it's been hard, finding postcards with a hotline number on it. I honestly do think if you're just talking, like I do these trainings all the time, and typically after each of them, there's somebody who calls in, especially if it's to professional groups, somebody who calls in a day, a week, or a year later and says that they've identified a case of trafficking that they wouldn't have thought was trafficking before. So honestly, I really can't underestimate the importance of talking about this. I think that it's simple, but that's how it works, because right now we have to be reaching. You don't know where the next trafficking victim is going to be. We just don't, unfortunately. So if we're talking about it, we're recognize people now know that, and they didn't necessarily know that there was a task force here locally, that there are services available. I think sometimes we have to just go one by one.
We have time for one last question.
I'd like to address
Go
that one
ahead,
also,
please.
just from a public safety standpoint. I agree that we do not want people going out investigating, some of these establishments, finding out if they are here against their will or not. I certainly recommend that if there's any evidence, to call your local police department, and we would make the proper referrals. There are other options, but we're a great place to start.
Thanks. Thank you. Yes, sir.
This question is for Chief McNerney. Sir, you mentioned that you had closed a number of massage parlors and you were having trouble keeping them closed. And I wondered if it's possible for the town of Greenburgh to construct their licensing and occupancy regulations in such a way where you don't have any trouble keeping them closed. I mean, I don't understand if it was a house of prostitution in the first place and it's closed, why should it be allowed to open again doing the same thing?
Well, I think that's a great point. That's exactly the intent of the proposed legislation. We want to have the authority to close them down permanently. As it is now, we don't have that authority. If they show up with, if the business owners, that is, they show up with individuals who are licensed by the state and they want to reopen and they give us new licenses, we have no authority to deny them, opening.
Can I address your point as well? When I was doing my research on this was obviously one of the questions that came up in some of the follow-up stories. Immediately, I was contacted by half a dozen town supervisors and select board members asking me, what do we do about this? And I really didn't have an answer. But in talking to some of the folks at the Polaris Project and Give Way to Freedom and some of the other anti-trafficking groups, I do know 2 municipalities in New Jersey, South Brunswick and Mount Olive, adopted local ordinances to address this very issue. One of the ordinances actually says that they can suspend a business for any criminal convictions involving sexual misconduct. So if the business had previously been involved in, basically been a house of prostitution or a brothel, they could shut them down for good. Mount Olive passed new health codes that require massage parlors to register their employees with the town, undergo criminal background checks. They banned alcohol and sleeping quarters on the premises, and they also made other restrictions. But there are ways, and you don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel here. I would strongly urge folks in this community. There is some other legislation. I know there's a community out in Ohio, town of Warren, Ohio, had a very serious problem with Asian massage parlors. They became sort of the, brothel capital of Ohio. They had, several dozen, I believe, and they restricted their hours of operation. They imposed training requirements, licensing fees, and I believe they were also working on statewide legislation there. So there are other places. I don't think you have to reinvent the wheel on all of this, and there are certainly things that have worked, and obviously you're not going to legislate your way out of this problem, and you're certainly not going to raid your way out of this problem. I think it's going to require a combination of factors, including just simple public education, training, your emergency rooms, the staff in the emergency room to recognize potential human trafficking victims if they show up with certain types of bruises, or training 911 operators. There's a whole host of things, and I'm sure Lauren could probably talk to those as well.
Well, I'm as concerned about trafficking as anyone, but I'm talking about massage parlors on Central Avenue right now.
Right, and there are municipalities in New York, Ken talked about New Jersey and out west. There are municipalities in New York that have local laws. And we are in the process of trying to enact one here to give us the legal authority to keep them closed permanently.
No question. Thank you.
Diane?
Yeah, I'm not allowed to publish the names of these places as a deterrent for the clients, hey, they're under watch, maybe I better not.
Chris, you want to comment?
In some way making that public.
They actually were published in the local newspapers, the names as well as the names of the people who were arrested and their ages. So that has been made public.
And their photographs.
Those are the ones that were shut down, though.
That's correct.
Right. You're not going to go there anyway because they're not there.
Some have reopened, and we have no authority to close them permanently.
Under the same name?
Yes, they can open up under the same name as everything stands right now, as long as they have valid licensees who come and step up and put their license on file.
I think the issue is that if they can get a license to practice as a masseuse, then they just apply to open a business, and if they don't violate the terms of that license, then they're free to operate. Where it gets sticky is if they add illicit behavior into the whole scenario.
That's not what we're finding. You find these people are not licensed at all. It's not a question of valid licensed masseuse. They're not a real problem. The massage parlor on Central Avenue does not fall into that category.
Exactly. We had 6 establishments that we just raided. Out of the 12 women that were there, 1 had a license.
Would you all join me in thanking all of our speakers? Terrific job. Thank you all so very much. Judy, back to you.
I want to give you a chance to finish that statement you were about to make. You said, if that.
I have a card over there.
If it's shut down and reopens without a valid license, is that what happens? They're allowed to reopen without a valid license to practice massage?
No, they need to present to the town a valid license from an individual that's licensed by the state to practice massage. As it is now, there's no business license.
There's
So
no
it's for the
business
individuals
license, right.
to practice massage, and as long as they're valid, they're authorized or permitted to open up. We find that the licenses are posted there, the individuals are not there.
So I just want to thank our audience so much for being here this evening. You contributed to the success of this evening. I recommend that we all continue to further educate ourselves by going on the website that Ken and Lauren referred to, Polaris. I started reading on that website, and it's just full of factual information and also recommendations as to how communities can become engaged in informing their residents, following through on one of the recommendations that was voiced by all of the speakers this evening. So where do we go from here, though, Marty and Ken, Chief and Lauren? Where do we go from here?
We do a follow-up session next month.
Let's enact more.
Thank you once again.